money
This
they can right
meeting is
now
being
because
recorded.
we know people are hurting, and just saving a few hundred or a few thousand can be the difference between closing your doors permanently or keeping a business afloat long enough to see this thing through. So we actually have lots of stuff that we can talk about, but because we all work at Shape Security, we're going to start with what we know best, which is fraud and abuse. So we're going to be talking about how small to medium-sized businesses can detect whatever levels of fraud or abuse exist in the platform, so that it can be cut off to save whatever money can be saved. So we'll have plenty ourselves to talk about. But if you join, if you're on Zoom, there's a little Q&A thingy somewhere on your screen, probably. You can submit questions to us. If you're willing to jump in video or whatever else, we can promote you and you can pop up on our screen and ask us a question there. You can use chat. And if you are on YouTube, I have over here the YouTube chat window that I will try to monitor and check for questions as they pop up. So again, I'm Jared Overson, and with me is Dan Woods and Tafara Muwandi. So Dan Woods, you want to give a little introduction of yourself?
Sure, Jared. Hi, everyone. So I'm Dan Woods. I head up the Shape Intelligence Center at Shape, which means we have data scientists that pore over all of our data looking for anomalies, looking for tools, monetization schemes, those sorts of things. So my background is I'm a former FBI agent, specialized in cyber. Also spent some time at CIA as a cyber operations officer, and sometimes a beat cop back in the early 90s.
Oh, Tafara, you want to give us a rundown?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Tafara Mwandi. I am the Director for Threat Analytics and Reporting at Shape Security. I've been at Shape now close to 3.5 years. So my team's responsibilities is looking over all the data, identifying any fraud schemes, monetization, dealing with automated as well as manual fraud actors.
Cool. And like I said, I'm Jared Overson. Started off as engineering at Shape. I went to director of engineering. Now just talk a lot about the problems that we see. So we're all talking about Shape Security, but Shape Security was recently bought by F5, and we are all technically F5ers right now. But it's going to take me a long time to figure out how to say that instead of just being a shaper. So we at Shape deal with monstrous fraud problems for big companies. But what we're talking about today are what you can look for at a much lower level to see what fraud might exist, if any fraud exists. And one of the things that people certainly need to jump into at the start is just figuring out what to look for. A lot of small to medium-sized businesses just they don't have a huge handle on as much data as they could, because there's so much scaling problems and so many other things to deal with. So let's start with just what to look for. Dan, you want to kick that off for us?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first and foremost, it's looking for anomalies. And what that specific anomaly is, it changes depending upon the business, depending upon what the baseline is for you. It might be an increase in account registrations at your on your website. It might be an increase in abandoned carts. It might be an increase in employees calling in sick. It might be any number of things. It all really depends upon the individual business. But so if you're not looking at these data, it's important to start looking at the data, and what the data are really varies depending upon the organization.
Yeah, so just to rewind a little bit, to give some history as to why we're doing this in the first place. I initially gave an offer on Twitter and LinkedIn to help small businesses figure out how to mitigate fraud or abuse, things like credential stuffing, spam, storage abuse, whatever else. And some of the conversations that I got mostly in LinkedIn direct messages was just what to look for. Like there are companies who certainly hear about credential stuffing in the news, but they don't even really know what that to look for to determine whether or not they have a problem, let alone even think about diving into a vendor trying to fix it. So, Tafara, could you give us a rundown of what credential stuffing is, and the types of stuff that somebody could look for to determine whether or not they might have a problem?
Sure. So credential stuffing is pretty much one of the kinds of automated attacks that many companies that have got digital websites would actually experience. So typically what happens is if another third party is compromised, for example, I'm sure most of you know about the Equifax breach or the Yahoo breach, where billions of credentials are actually stolen. Those criminals then take those usernames and passwords. And because people have a tendency of reusing the same username and password everywhere, they take those spilled credentials from Equifax or from Yahoo and try them against your website to see if any of those compromised accounts are actually valid on your site. Because there's lots of these credentials, sometimes in the hundreds of millions, sometimes in the billions that they're trying to validate, they have to use automated methods to try all these billions of usernames and passwords against your website. That is what we call credential stuffing. So typically how you are able to identify credential stuffing is a high number of logins, typically with a very low login success rate, because most of the credentials that they're trying on your website, they don't even have accounts at your website. And for those that do have accounts, some of them might use a different password, therefore will not be able to log in successfully. So some of the key sort of early warning signs is if you see random spikes or random increases in the volume of logins that you experience, and if the login success rate that you see is very low. Typically, what we would expect for legitimate human users, we expect anything between 65 to about 85% login success rate, depending on the nature of your business. For many retail sites, people don't remember their usernames and passwords for retailers that much. So that's typically on the lower end. That's about 65%. And for financial institutions and sort of fintech, sort of where money is involved, people tend to pay a lot more attention and tend to remember their usernames and passwords much better. So the login success rate is typically higher. So if you see anything lower than that, typically less than 50%, then likely you would be experiencing some level of credential stuffing.
So when it comes to credential stuffing, like what are the types of scams, or what type of fraud amounts, or I guess what fraud comes from stolen accounts? So why would I be credential stuffing smaller businesses? Do either of you have any examples of the types of things that somebody might be seeing themselves, but not know necessarily where it originates from?
Yeah, I think that the motive of a lot of these fraudsters is to gain access to an account and whatever assets are in the account. Obviously, for a bank, it's cash money, but for airlines and hotels and retailers, it might be frequent flyer miles or loyalty points. It might be gift card balances. It might just be personally identifiable information that facilitates social engineering. So it depends on the nature of the account and what type of assets are within the account. I might suggest that some of the people who are participating and watching right now, if they would just send in a message that says maybe the vertical or the type of business they're in, we could be able to drill down on that specific type of vertical. So if there's interest in that, please send in a comment.
Yeah,
I can also add on to that.
Yeah, go for it.
So some of the things sort of once a person, successfully takes over someone's account, would be to make unauthorized purchases. So if, for example, you have a website that offers, some product, because most of your customers have got stored payment methods, the attacker or whoever takes over the account through credential stuffing is able to make purchases and have those purchases shipped to an address that they control. Typically, these goods get sent to what are called reshippers, who then sort of forward on those goods to the actual fraudster. So that's one thing that happens a lot in terms of actually trying to make fraudulent purchases. Some websites, even for small and medium scale enterprises, offer specific services. So a simple example would be, if someone was to take over your Spotify premium account, they would then sort of have access to that service and enjoy those benefits without actually paying for that service. So if you have a website that actually charges people for use or for gaining certain entertainment or other value out of it, then that can be used by other individuals that may not be necessarily paying for your service.
Yeah, I talk a lot about credential stuffing just in general, because it's one of those problems that is so easy to dismiss. As one, it's people reusing passwords, so it doesn't feel like your problem to begin with as a service owner. It's somebody else's problem for using a crappy password. But it's also easy to dismiss because it sounds like the type of problem that would only or mostly plague things like banks. Anywhere where you have credit card information or stored money that can be stolen. But what we've seen in all sorts of companies is criminals will find a way to exploit virtually any service if they have access to a bulk number of accounts. There's something that somebody can get out of it. And it's just a matter of how creative the criminal is going to be and how they can exploit it. So if you're on the stream or whatever else, and you feel comfortable sharing your type of business or what industry you're in, we'd love to drill down and explore some examples of the type of fraud that can amount from stolen accounts, because it's always interesting. One thing that we haven't touched on yet, but is very related to credential stuffing, is automated account creation. So if you have the any sort of create account form on a website, and you either have some sort of immediate value with an account, or you're giving away something free, either some credit to a service, promo codes, discounts, or whatever else, it becomes there's enough incentive there for criminals to just use something like Puppeteer or Curl or Selenium to just create hundreds or thousands of accounts, grab all those coupons or discounts or whatever, and then either resell them or drain that value somehow. And that's one of the other things that you can certainly start looking out for, are unexplainable spikes in interaction flows on your website. So not just visits or anything else, but just things that users have to do. When you have spikes that you can't explain for one reason or the other, definitely worth looking into. Do you have any other, do you guys have any individual points of data that are worth charting or graphing if people aren't doing it now?
I have one that hasn't been mentioned yet, and that is how often people log off. I think a lot of legitimate customers will log into a site and engage whatever business they logged in for, and then they'll either just walk away from their, if it's a personal computer, they'll just walk away, or they'll close the tab or close the browser. They don't typically log off. Fraudsters, however, will log off. So if you find there's a particular number of IPs or autonomous systems or user agents that in the aggregate have a high degree of clicking the log off button, you might have a strong signal that there's some fraud going on there. And I guess another example was how quickly your humans navigate your workflows. For example, if you were to right now launch your banking app and add a payee and go to send that payee money, my guess is you'd have to look for the add payee button because you don't do it every day. Fraudsters navigate workflows very, very efficiently. They add payees hundreds of times a day. So if you have the type of data that allows you to analyze the efficiency at which humans navigate your workflows, and you focus on the top 5-10% of the most efficient humans, you might find some fraud.
Yeah, that's a good one. Tafara, you have any favorite metrics that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so I think it is important when you are, I guess, designing sort of especially like promotional sort of campaigns. I know especially with sort of small to medium scale businesses, they try a lot to sort of take into account viral marketing, etc. But always putting a fraud angle to it. Some of the things that we've seen being abused are sort of referral bonuses and referral programs where you say that if you refer a friend and your friend signs up for my service, I will give you $5, right? That incentivizes people to pretty much refer themselves and keep making $5 every single time. So you need to be very careful sort of how you design some of those schemes to ensure that the $5 only gets paid when more than $5 has been spent on your platform. So typically you would say, I will only give you $5 if the person has spent or made their first purchase, knowing that your minimum purchase on your site is more than $5. That removes that incentive for people to like try and take advantage of such schemes. Otherwise people will just keep printing money out of you.
Yeah, that's a good one. Uh, One of the things that I've been talking about to my developer circles. There are a lot of people who host their own projects or own sites as kind of just services to the world. So useful things that people that other developers might want to use. Those are very frequently very quickly spun up, don't have a lot of services behind it, and just open to the world. And one of the things that I commonly see is the ability to either upload or serve some sort of specific type of file, either JavaScript or an image or something useful for developers in the web developer sphere. But what can happen with sites like that, for any site that allows a user to upload an arbitrary amount of data, either in a text field or via an upload form or anything else, those can be abused by criminals, or well, by less than savory legitimate people to host malicious software or even entire phishing sites that leverage your domain for its legitimacy and trust in order to try and take advantage of other people. So if you are allowing for any sort of uploads or any sort of storage from your users, looking at the types of behavior that your most legitimate trusted users have, and then comparing that to the behavior of some edge case users, either users who are uploading a lot or uploading peculiarly sized files or files that have a very, very strange format. You don't need to dig too much into this. You just need to be able to classify anomalous behavior so that you can dig into it more deeply, so that you can protect yourself at the very least from additional traffic and hosting charges, and beyond. Protect yourself from losing trust, so that your domain gets blacklisted as serving malicious software to innocent users. There's lots of risk out there by just leaving these services up and open.
Hey, Jared, I thought that I might add just some general good, best practices, not just for companies, but for individuals, because, what is a company but a collection of individuals, right? So, especially absent, clear idea on who the audience is and what verticals and what pain they might be feeling. These are the kinds of things that everybody should just practice across the board all the time. And one is never reuse passwords.
Yeah.
It's different companies are requiring different password policies. Some have to be 8 to 16 characters with special characters and symbols, upper lowercase numbers. Some of these are very hard to memorize, so oftentimes people just reuse passwords. My advice is don't ever, and instead use a password manager. There are lots of password managers out there, and you just memorize one really strong password for access to your password manager, and then your password manager will just create a very strong password for every one of your accounts. I think I have like 300 or 400 usernames and passwords in my password manager. So that's advice number one. Another would be shred everything. Shredder's cheap. They also make great wedding gifts. I always give a shredder to anyone who's getting married. So shred everything, and don't just shred the important documents. Shred everything, because that's just a really good practice. We still have people, even in today's digital age, doing dumpster diving. They're probably going through your company's trash, going through your personal trash, all looking for ways to exploit you. So that's two of them. What do you think, Jared, Tafara? Anything to add?
Certainly, but without jumping into adding yet, I want to touch on password managers because this is a question I get constantly. I have my own answer, but I'm going to toss it over to you first. So, if uh, if if having a bunch of reused passwords is dangerous, isn't having all your passwords in one place, protected by one password, even more dangerous?
It is, and I have a trick, and I don't. This is really a good trick. The password that your password manager has shouldn't be the password used for your each account. Okay, you have one password to get into the account. The password manager has a bunch of passwords. You will just add, 3, 4 letters, digits, something to the end of each of those passwords. So the way it would work is you go to log in to your bank, say, you launch your password manager, enter in that password, go down to the bank, copy that password, paste it in, then type in your additional characters. It's virtually foolproof. That way, even if the password manager is compromised, they think they have all these passwords, but none of them work because they're missing the few characters that you type at the end or even at the beginning. You develop your own system.
Yeah, so when it comes to the password managers, the risk versus just trying to remember all your passwords. I also wanted to touch on that the passwords are used for different purposes in different places, despite the fact that we all just call them passwords. The passwords that are exploited with things like credential stuffing and whatever else, those are used with some sort of username or something that you are to authenticate that you are who you were last time you went to a service, so that you can be provided the same service that you had last time. It's like when you sign up with Amazon with a username and password, and then you leave for a few months, and you sign into Amazon again with the same username and password, you still have access to your Amazon Prime subscription or whatever else. When we talk about passwords, to like one password to unlock all your authentication passwords, the password there that we're usually talking about is a secret string of letters and numbers and whatever else that will decrypt your other passwords. So the password there is a secret key that encrypts and decrypts the blob of data. And it's a different type of password used for a different purpose. So yes, having all your passwords in one place does make them more vulnerable to an attack. But compared to the risk that you have by using poor passwords across all your internet sites, the risk is much, much lower than what you're subjecting yourself to otherwise. Tafara, I sidetracked the conversation into a password manager talk. Did you have other general advice that you could pass off?
Yeah, I think this was hinted on a bit earlier. Is that, for you to be able to manage and keep a tab on fraud, you need to be able to be very close to your metrics. Be close to the data, know what's going on. Set up, whether it's Google Analytics or whatever tools that you can have to be able to pull out some of these key metrics. Many of them we've mentioned, and some of them you can even look up online in terms of knowing what are the benchmarks. Understand your business. What is normal? What's the normal number of visitors I get, or normal number of signups, or normal number of logins I get on a given day? What is the normal sort of look to buy ratio? What is the normal number of new credit card payments that get added onto my platform every single day? And then once you know what that benchmark looks like, keeping an eye out and setting alerts for any time that those deviate from what you expect. I think being close to the numbers, I think, is the number one piece of advice that I would give to any entrepreneur or sort of small business owner.
Yeah, analytics are tough. Google Analytics is not an easy thing to jump into and be productive with right away. You get the general view, which is great to figure out the number of visitors and referral rates, drop offs, whatever else. But to get the more nuanced view into the stuff that matters to your business, you do have to add. You do have to put in some elbow grease to get it configured for your application, and potentially even modify your application to make sure that it's tracking the flows you want, so you can get the right views you need. It's not something that's insurmountable. That's an insurmountable amount of effort, but it does take concerted effort to get through that learning curve and get to a point where you feel confident and comfortable. And it really helps if you do at least spend a bit of time, at least every week, if that's the most you can do, just getting an understanding as to what your traffic looks like. Dig a little bit deeper into one aspect of that traffic, figure out a new angle on something to give you a different perspective on user flows and where users are going, where they're coming from. That'll be very, very helpful for loads of things. You can use that information to boost traffic and boost conversions. Make yourself some extra money while you can with the traffic you have right now. There's a lot there. It's not easy, but it's something that there are a lot of tutorials and videos on how you can get the most out of it. So we got one question on the Zoom side. Somebody who has a generic e-commerce site, is all I said. I just want to know, like, what types of things in the e-commerce world can they keep an eye on at all times? So I'm assuming just like there's a login, create account, and then some sort of like a purchase flow is what I'm assuming this site has.
I'd also add forgot password to that. Oftentimes attackers launch attacks against the forgot password endpoint just to enumerate accounts. And as I mentioned before, log off. So I would say e-commerce would be looking at increased traffic on create account, on login, forgot password, log off. Something else that I think is applicable to really all verticals, including e-commerce, would be screen utilization. Most of your customers use the full screen. Oftentimes fraudsters will use just a portion of the screen for your website because the other part of the screen is some sort of tooling that they're using to launch their attack. We'll also see a large increase in pasting operations for some fraudsters, so keep an eye out for increases in pasting operations. And I have a few other general recommendations, but I don't want to go off this topic yet. So come back to me, Jared, when we're done with this topic.
Yeah, sure. Tafara, e-commerce suggestions?
Yeah, so my suggestion is, keep your eye on the money. I think the money typically tells you sort of, a lot about what's happening. Things to sort of pay attention to is chargebacks. If you get an increased number of chargebacks, where people are saying that they did not buy the product or service, and they want their money back, that's a telltale sign that either you've got an account takeover problem where someone is using sort of good credentials that are saved by your users and making unauthorized purchases, or you've got a carding problem where someone has created an account and is using stolen credit cards to make purchases on your website. So that, for me, I think would be one of the first things to look out for if you see an increased number of either complaints, either coming into you on your Twitter pages about unauthorized purchases, or you actually receive chargebacks from PayPal or Visa, MasterCard, whatever sort of payments providers that you're using. That, for me, would be a big thing to sort of keep an eye on. What's also important, like I mentioned earlier, sort of those login success rates. Keeping an eye on what the average login success rate looks like. And like I mentioned, typically for e-commerce, that's between 65 to 70% is what you would expect. So anything lower than that, or if there's any IP or any particular user agents or devices that have got very low login success rate or very high volumes, making sure that you've got your eyes on that and you're paying a lot of attention to that. The other things that we would also be able to sort of look at is many e-commerce sites have got discount codes or discount voucher buttons. You would expect that the number or the validity of the codes that are being typed in should be pretty high. So if you see, millions of attempts against your discount code or your discount voucher page, with most of them being invalid, that's a telltale sign that someone is simply trying to brute force and guess what those discount vouchers are, thereby, disadvantaging your legitimate customers from actually getting those discounts and having those discounts in the hands of people who may not be the intended targets. That, I think, would be some of the things that I would look at. I'd also look at what are called look to purchase ratios, in terms of how many, what's your overall conversion rates. So typically some websites struggle with scraping, where someone is simply trying to get a list of all the products that you sell, how much inventory you have, and what your prices are, and then use that for competitive reasons. By looking at, you expect a certain number of page views will result in something being added to the cart or actually being purchased. Those are also some of the things that you can look at, together with cart abandonment rates that Dan mentioned earlier, in terms of how many times are goods added to your cart and don't actually end up being purchased. Because if you have maybe an unscrupulous competitor and your website actually suffers from inventory lockout, then they could create hundreds or thousands of accounts on your website, buy up all your inventory and put that into carts, but never actually check out, thereby depriving your legitimate customers who actually want to purchase products from your website from having access to those products.
Yeah, something else I'd add on e-commerce is, item not received fraud is a huge problem. So what happens is people order an item and they'll get it and they'll just claim they didn't get it, and you'll end up shipping a second one. We have customers losing millions of dollars to that fraud. So that's impacting virtually every e-commerce site across the board.
Yeah, and right now, especially gift card fraud will be so much more damaging if you have legitimate users that have legitimate gift cards, but those gift cards, either numbers or however you track them, are being stolen and used by scammers. You lose out on whatever they've purchased or however they've monetized those gift cards. And then you inevitably have to either refund the user that got scammed or lose a potential good user because they no longer want to use your site. Sometimes even both. So gift cards are the types of thing that sound like potentially an easy thing to develop if you have a small engineering team that is capable. But there's a lot of fraud that comes from gift cards because they're not infrequently implemented without the care necessary to protect against a lot of abuse. And if you have gift cards, then you are essentially some size of a bank. You have stored value that you control and is used to purchase real items that have monetary value. So you have to treat it like money and protect it like money. Otherwise, scammers are gonna abuse you for it.
Yeah, one more comment on gift card fraud. This is one of those types of fraud that, the physical and the cyber world actually both are impacted. What I mean by that is the check balance endpoint is often targeted by fraudsters who are they're just guessing at gift card numbers, because once you have the gift card number and the PIN, that's all you need to monetize it, to steal it from somebody. So we see automated attacks against those all the time, but loss prevention in the physical store needs to be aware that somebody loitering around the gift card rack, maybe taking pictures at the back of cards. That's something that's very alarming, because they don't just guess random numbers at the gift card balance check application. If they get a couple of valid gift cards, that gives them a large portion of the gift card number, and then they will just cycle through the unknowns. Of course, the last digit is the checksum by the Loon algorithm, so that is something that they can calculate. So yeah, that's something to keep an eye out if you have brick and mortar facilities, watching people around the gift card racks.
Yeah, if there's any mechanism in your service to validate something that has value, either a credit card, address, email address, anything, that is something that is very, very frequently abused by scammers who might be applying the majority of fraud elsewhere, but can still cost you a lot of money because those validations usually cost money. And really, we haven't actually touched on this yet in this entire time so far, but a lot of the fraud, actually all the fraud that exists, it's a risk reward, cost benefit, cost value play by the scammers and fraudsters, where they're going to do the cheapest thing possible to get what they need done to provide themselves more income or value or whatever else. So now that so many big services out there, the big retailers, big banks, now they're protecting themselves so much against these types of attacks. Scammers are trickling down to smaller companies who have not yet learned how to protect themselves, because they can get the same sort of validation on those services. They might have to spread the attacks across a few different companies or over a long period of time for traffic scaling purposes. But a lot of the same attacks can be applied there. And you don't necessarily need huge defenses to protect yourself from any of these, because you're a small company. No one's going to be able to attack you to get millions and millions of dollars out of it. You can have some simple IP rate limits or ASN rate limits, geographical geofencing. You can do some fairly basic defenses that can be pretty effective for small companies. Would not be effective at all against the massive retailers in the world. But since the value out of the small companies is so much smaller, small defenses can have a fairly large impact.
Yeah. So just another thing I wanted to add in sort of in line sort of what we've been talking about. I think Dan sort of alluded to this when he spoke about protecting the forgot password and sort of how attackers use that to enumerate accounts. I think it's important to make sure that the website gives back as little feedback as possible. So in the example of the forgot password that Dan was talking about, if a person just goes to the forgot password and types in a random email address, does it tell the fraudster whether that account exists or doesn't exist? So we typically encourage you to give a very generic sort of feedback that says, if your account exists, check your inbox and we have sent you a password reset link. That doesn't say yes and it doesn't say no. So that stops, attackers from knowing whether a particular email account exists on your platform or not, because attackers use that to enumerate the accounts and they can do a bunch of things. So once they know that it's specific emails exist, they can either try to brute force the password, or they can alternatively target your users, because now they have the email address. They could socially engineer them, send them phishing emails to say, hey, we've seen some fraud activity on your account. Please click this link to reset your password. Then take them, to a phishing site, and then sort of actually steal valid credentials. So giving away a list of your valid username, your valid customers' email addresses is something that you want to try and avoid to do at all costs.
Yeah, Dan, that reminds me. There was something I was supposed to come back to you for. It was around the forgot password discussion originally, but I forget what I was coming back to you for. Do you remember?
Yeah, sure. It was just general advice, not specific to e-commerce or banking or anything like that, but just general advice. And two things that I always tell my friends, family, and loved ones is freeze your credit. I think it's very important. Freeze your credit. There's no reason to have your credit unfrozen. When you go to the 3 credit reporting agencies to freeze your credit, they don't make it easy. They don't want you to freeze your credit. They're going to charge you a small fee, but it's dictated by law across the country. It's very affordable. I mean, it's like $5, $10, $15 depending on the state. And then you can, whenever you're applying for credit somewhere, you can thaw the credit for, a day, a week, or something like that. But very important, freeze your credit. The second thing would be, and computers are cheap enough today where this is possible. You can have a dedicated computer for your very sensitive activities. Computers are cheap. Have a cheap laptop that you only use for your sensitive activities, like your banking, logging into sensitive accounts. And you don't use that computer for general web surfing. And you certainly don't let your teenager use that computer for web surfing. You really, it's important. And one higher tech alternative to having a separate computer is using virtual machines. On one computer, you could have several actual machines. And that's what I do. I'll use a virtual machine to go out to the dark web or use or access questionable sites. And I'm sure that virtual machine has been exploited many times over, but it doesn't impact my protected machine. So those were the two additional general best practices that I wanted to make known.
Yeah, it's the computer one. I think it's even more, I guess, practical nowadays because so much is done over web browsers that you can just get a very, very cheap Chromebook and do the vast majority of what you need to on a very, very limited device that basically just has a web browser. Those devices are easier to keep up to date with security patches because you don't have a whole bunch of other applications running that you're worried about compatibility with or backing up large numbers of files. You can just have it update automatically as quickly as possible and shove it in the corner until you need it for banking or whatever else. That's a good one, and they're as cheap as like $150 right now, which is not nothing, but it's certainly not an Apple MacBook.
Yeah, not every small, medium-sized business can afford to do this, but at Shape, if I'm traveling abroad, depending upon the country, I won't even bring my laptop. I'll bring a Chromebook, do all my work from the Chromebook, and then as soon as I come back stateside, the Chromebook isn't reformatted; it's destroyed. There's just no sense in taking a risk, depending upon the country you go to, of course,
Yeah.
and what it is you're doing. So I have maybe an anecdote. Can I share an anecdote?
Yeah.
All right. So we had back. It was going back to the "I do not receive" fraud. There are these, really they're criminal organizations, but sometimes they're just a bunch of college kids in a dorm. They order a MacBook Pro online, then they claim they didn't receive it, and they get a second one mailed to them. Or it doesn't have to be a MacBook. It could be, Apple AirPods. It could be anything that is a high dollar value that many of these companies will just send out a new one rather than debating with the customer. And well, then they go, well, this customer's done this before, so we're not going to approve it this time. And well, they start creating fake accounts and getting their friends to do it, their family members to do it. And over time, there's just this large, network of people who are trying to game the system. Well, there's even now spun up these refunder. These are people who specialize in refunding on your behalf, and they claim that they know what to say, how to say it to get that item refunded or to get a new item shipped, and they just whoever hires them. They have an agreement where they get some portion of the proceeds. So, we're talking to one of our retail customers. They shared with us one of the schemes that the refunder was using, and instead of saying I didn't receive it, they said that it had blood on it. So they made it a biohazard. So now the customer's saying, well, okay, I'm not claiming I didn't receive it. Now I'm claiming I did receive it, but it's a biohazard. What do you want me to do? Use this MacBook Pro with blood on it, or are you going to send me a new one? And of course, they sent a new one. So that was just one example of what the refunders claim to be able to do. And they're advertised on the dark web. I don't know, Jared, if we're including some of our contact information at the bottom of the video, but I'm happy to take any additional questions from people after the webinar. If they have specific questions, they could contact us and we can answer them.
I think that's actually a really good point. So I'll add in the YouTube description ways to contact us. I'm available via Twitter. Dan, I don't think you're a very social person, so I think a lot can funnel through me, and I'll pass it on. But I think that what I would love to do at some point, if you guys are up to it, I think just general talks like this on the types of scams and fraud, the actual examples, would be just really, really interesting because that really brings to light how creative these criminals are. Like even that, I didn't know that there were professional refunders, but makes sense.
Yeah, and also I'd send an invitation to everybody who is watching the video that if you have an anecdote, you have something you want to share, that maybe you could participate in a future meeting, because we'd love to talk to you. We'd like to learn from you as much as you learn from us. These are strange times we live in, so I think it's going to require that all like-minded people, security professionals, collaborate. So that's something that we're very interested in doing at Shape. And I don't want anybody to think this is some, sales or marketing ploy. This isn't. Jared is actually the person who came up with this idea, and we absolutely love it. The idea that we can just share some ideas with the general public, people who are interested, and start a conversation that appeals to us very much.
Thanks, Dan. So I think we're getting probably close to time enough on this. What would be great to end this out is I guess on the theme of recommendations. So in general, not even related to business or internet service or whatever else. What can an individual do on top of what we've already talked about to be aware of scams, to protect themselves from scams, or to otherwise make sure that they stay as safe as possible at a time where scams and panic-induced exploitation is going to be common?
Yeah, so I would say, I think, always be, vigilant, always be suspicious. If anything seems too good to be true, it most likely is. You're not that lucky, you're not that fortunate. Like, things don't just drop into your lap. I know, people are going to be desperate for money, and criminals know that, and they're going to be sort of trying to take advantage of that. Just be vigilant, always be, suspicious. Don't feel rushed to make sort of decisions, sort of immediately or quickly. Take your time. Always ask to sleep on it, and talk to other people about sort of anything that you've been offered or that you're thinking to take. Do your due diligence to check up on things before jumping into it, and I think you can keep yourself out of a lot of trouble.
Yeah, something real quick to add on to what Tafara just said. When I was at CIA years ago, one of my mentors told me that, hey, if a young, beautiful woman, sidles up to you at a bar and starts expressing interest in you and your life and your job, it's you're not that good looking, Dan. They're trying to elicit information, so be on the guard for that. And I'm not that good looking, so when a beautiful woman shows interest, she clearly has ulterior motives.
Yeah, I think the advice that I normally give to protect against scams applies double or triply right now. When you get unsolicited messages, either via social forums or email or even phone calls, be extremely skeptical of any claims. If you have anyone trying to make you feel like you need to make a decision quickly, that is a massive red flag. No one acting professionally or in your best interest will try to make you rush into a decision without you being able to sleep on it, like Tafara said, get advice from people you trust. So always put the brakes on anything that is happening. If you get emails or social messages, don't click on links. Like Tafara and even Dan said, you're not that lucky. You're not that good looking. When things feel like they're coming your way, be very, very skeptical. And this is something that people hear a lot about in terms of email, and a lot of people have grown accustomed to not trusting weird things in email. But in all messaging services, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, any service that allows somebody to message somebody else for nothing, that is an avenue where phishing, scams, exploitation can happen. And at times like this, people are already tense. People are already panicking and scared. So different types of scams are popping up. Don't let the new format and new topics in those scams fool you. All scams don't have to be from Nigerian princes. They could be people trying to sell you N95 masks to protect your family from viruses. Don't go buying random masks from people who message you on Facebook. All right, I think that just about closes us up. So I will post contact information in the YouTube link. You can funnel any questions through LinkedIn or Twitter to me, and I'll get them over to Dan and Tafara. And like we said earlier, we love talking about this stuff. You'll never get sales pitches or anything from us. We're fans of the space. It's incredibly interesting. One of the things we like to do is take stories of fraud and then figure out where they originated from. So if you have weird things that are happening in your business that are causing you pain, feel free to reach out to us and talk about it with us. Chances are we might have heard similar stories from other companies and can piece it back quickly. And if we haven't, then it'll be even more interesting to us, and we'll be more willing to dig deeper to figure out what's going on. All right. Well, thank you for joining, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.